Welcome back for part one of my special retrospective. This is the retrospective for the sixth console generation, my personal favorite generation. Enjoy the music from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So with that said, I also chose on the side a few specific games that hold a very special place for me, looking at games from many different genres of gaming, and talking a bit about just the games that most hold a special place for me for the specific console. Of course, this in part one, looking at my all-time favorite console, the Sega Dreamcast. Next time, I will be looking at easily the most successful with the PlayStation 2, then the GameCube, and then the original Xbox. So with that said, first up, the original Dreamcast. Now, total, you would have a couple of variants. You would have one main key variant of the Sega Dreamcast, of course, here in America. Originally, the Sega Dreamcast would launch in America with the advertising $9,999. It would be released on September the 9th, the year 1999, and it would release for the price of $199.99. Kind of big on the whole gimmick, obviously, but that's no surprise. The Dreamcast is and will always be, in my opinion, the best console of all time, though its unfortunate console lifespan would be relatively short. Total, the console would only be in production for close to about 3 years. Um, Before I get into in depth on some specifics like favorite games and things like that, one of the big things that did the Dreamcast in, unfortunately, a lot of people automatically say the PS2. That was a big thing. Obviously, the fact that also it was cheaper than most DVD players at the time when the PS2 came out. It would be released for like $100 more than the Dreamcast, obviously. But with that said, still, I think this was released for a very good price range, targeting basically $200 at release. That's a good deal. I mean, versus other consoles and stuff, you could get quite a bit for that amount of money. And it had, in my opinion, maybe the greatest uh, launch of any console, in my opinion, at least of lineup of launch titles, anyways. Because you had titles in so many different genres of gaming, such a great variety. Of course, one of the key notable launch titles, of course, being the first full 3D Sonic game, was Sonic Adventures. Now, that's not one of the games I will be talking about of my personal favorite that hold very special place for me. Though I love Sonic Adventures, don't get me wrong. With that said, though, the console would get a couple of very unique variants exclusively, though, unfortunately, to Japan. Like the see-through Hello Kitty edition Dreamcast. You would have like a special variant dedicated to a specific higher-up in Sega at the time. You would also see some other really interesting variants. There was like a Space Channel 5 variant, and a few others. Now, they can run quite a pretty penny if you're interested in those. You're looking at probably $500 or $600 at least for the variants. And the Dreamcast itself, console-wise, is relatively still affordable. I mean, you can probably pick one up for about $60, $70. Pretty reasonable in my opinion overall. Gone up a little, but in the end, the three main things that unfortunately led to the demise of the Dreamcast was one, the looming PS2, obviously, though the Dreamcast actually would do better in North America than it would in its home country of Japan. Most people in Japan decided to wait for the PS2. But, speaking as a hardcore, long-time Sega fanboy, I guess you could say, I was somebody who was in line, couldn't find any of these at launch, at like Babbage's, which is now GameStop, Babbage's Electronics Boutique, KB Toys, Toys R Us, Rest in Peace, all those different businesses. But I actually left at the time at my local Sears, which has a small electronics gaming department, and they actually were fully stocked on these, which is where I picked up my Dreamcast. And yeah, this actually is my original Dreamcast. Obviously, I've taken very good care of it throughout the years, but I have had this console since launch. So I have had the Dreamcast for almost 22 years, miles to say, close to 21 and a half. So yeah, very long time, but it's a console that will always hold a special place for me. And later on, a few years ago, I would finally get my hands on the main US variant of the Dreamcast. Of course, that being the Black Sega Sports Edition Dreamcast. Now, personally, I think this one is way more gorgeous looking. Just my opinion overall. There, put that in a little background. But I love the design of the Sega Sports Edition. It's just gorgeous looking in my opinion. Just looks really nice in the black. It is too bad they didn't release like a black variant minus the Sega Sports label on it. Still, it is just really beautiful looking. But at the end of the day, this was just an awesome console with an incredible library for the short time it would make and manufacture games. The console itself would be manufactured a little less than 3 years, though it would see production of games up to around 2004 2005 range. The biggest thing that unfortunately led to the destruction of the Dreamcast was pirating, specifically burning, because it was relatively easy to actually burn and copy Dreamcast games. Unfortunately, it was a little too easy to do, and that's what led to, I think, one of the biggest problems that the Dreamcast had was the burning CDs or games and stuff, which I unfortunately knew one person, one of only two people I ever knew with a Dreamcast. Um, Unfortunately, burnt almost all the games, which infuriated me as a longtime hardcore Sega fan who wanted to see the Dreamcast actually thrive and succeed well. Now, out of its close to 5 million units that sold worldwide, it sold close to 4 million of those units here in the US. So, close to 50% of its global sales come from just North America. So, thanks to me and other hardcore Sega fans, and I think if, now, as I've mentioned before, quickly mentioned before I go on with this little retrospective, one of the problems for modern collecting for the Dreamcast is the prices, because unless you're a hardcore Sega fan or a hardcore Dreamcast fanatic like myself, you're probably not going to be willing to pay the price on some of the games. You can find some games relatively cheap, but a lot of them are very expensive, especially Capcom games. Specifically, given about half of the best-selling games on the Dreamcast were Capcom. I mean, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, in case in almost perfect condition, is going to run you about $150, believe it or not, Third Strike. If you want the authentic, original American release. You can get the Japanese release for about a third of the price. And nevertheless, and the thing about the Dreamcast was it was really ahead of its time with the whole ability to be able to plug in and do dial-up internet, obviously, and other plug-in stuff you could do with this, which was really cool in the fact that it used Microsoft Windows CE, which of course right there is the logo. But which was cool, it also offered some online gameplay stuff. Specifically, the best example of that is probably Phantasy Star Online, which really was ahead of its time, honestly. The Dreamcast was way ahead when it came to online capabilities, online. Believe it or not, there are still small private servers up and running to this day on the Dreamcast. There's some hardcore, very loyal people out there who still have some actual stuff running Dreamcast. Now, you can do that successfully if you buy a device known as a Raspberry Pi. Uh, you can get that. It will also help like duplicate and allow you to be able to play through like broadband internet and stuff, and it simulates basically dial-up. It's actually really interesting. I recommend checking some of the different stuff out. If you want to do this gameplay or recording stuff in HD, you can buy a special HDMI special plugin for the Dreamcast um, through Limited Run Games. Actually has special HDMI type plugins and stuff for older consoles. You can get like they have stuff for the N64 slash Super Nintendo and stuff. They have plugins for original Xbox, for the PS1 slash 2, for the Dreamcast, the Sega Saturn. I mean, they've developed quite a few. So if you're all curious, I recommend looking into it. But at the end of the day, a console is only as good as its other attachments and stuff. Now, there was definitely a lot of different stuff that you could get. For the Dreamcast, there was like a full Dreamcast keyboard that you could do for like playing selected like online games and stuff. Plus, the fact you got internet browser disc with the launch and everything in box, which is really cool in my opinion. Developed a lot of the online software and stuff was done by obviously Microsoft Windows, which made sense. But definitely, it is a very fascinating history looking back at the Dreamcast. It did so many things right, and to this day, you can still find indie games brand new being developed in Japan and Europe and different places in the indie scene. But boy, do those games cost a lot of money if you want them. Because they're made very small, limited amounts. They make limited run look big in comparison. And most of those indie games are going to run you easily probably $100 per title. So just know that. Also, there's a lot of duplicate fake copies of games that have been made throughout the years for Dreamcast, so you have to be careful when you're collecting. You really want to pay attention to detail. Look at like everything on the sellers. If you go through eBay and buy a lot of stuff like me, you definitely want to do your research when it comes to Dreamcast games and stuff. Also look into the seller that's selling it. See what like their overall positive approval rating is from buyers and stuff. Also look whether or not they trust how many things they have sold. You just want to take multiple things into account when looking at things, especially for a console like the Dreamcast, the Saturn, the GameCube, and consoles like that. They're definitely very big collector's items nowadays, especially among the hardcore community. And Dreamcast will always have a maybe a very small base, but a very hardcore base, who are going to go out of their way. Same as Sega Saturn collectors. I've only pretty new to the Saturn thing over the last several years, but Dreamcast is just great to collect for. Quickly also mention, it is fascinating, the whole design of like the controller. One of the greatest mysteries I think is the fact normal, that's how the plug and stuff cord is for the controller. The fact you have to actually do, you see this little thing? It's kind of weird. You have to do this in order for the cord to go up and out like a normal controller. It is kind of weird. And the fact also, though, you can plug two things in here. Obviously, there's a lot of elements. Some of the basic design and definitely the whole double thing at top obviously played a heavy influence in the original Xbox design and layout. Plus, so many sequels and Sega exclusive games from the Dreamcast went to original Xbox. But I think one of the things that makes the Dreamcast so unique was this thing here for the screen of the main brand controllers or memory cards. In my opinion, the Dreamcast had the best memory card ever, or also known as VMUs. And when you turned it on and stuff, you would get to see a cool little picture icon on your controller, and you never know what it would be. But it's cool the fact it also was designed like a little controller. I mean, it has its own little D-pad A and B buttons, as well as a sleep mode, regular mode, and stuff. And the fact, if someone else had another one of these cool little plug-in things right here, all you had to do was plug into another one, and with your friend you could exchange different memory stuff to each other. Give somebody a copy of your game progress, they could give you a copy of progress on your game you're interested in, and just exchange like that, plug into each other. Not needing to have both plugged into a console. But keep in mind, in order to do that, that would also require, of course, obviously, watch batteries in order to do that. And sadly, the watch batteries do die relatively quickly. That's just something to keep in mind if you're interested. But yeah, in my opinion, Dreamcast had the best memory card ever. There is no debate about that. It's just awesome looking. And that's one of my favorite parts about the Dreamcast controller is just this. Now talking a bit quickly about some of the games before I cut up this video. I hope, as mentioned, you've been enjoying the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 music. Now quickly, some of the games that hold a very special place for me. One by one. First up, I want to go on quickly my personal favorite sports game from the Dreamcast. Sadly, I don't have the original case, but that being, of course, Hydro Thunder, which was a launch title for it. Now, also I have, sadly don't have the original case for Soul Calibur, but I do have also the Japanese import version of this as well. But those were the first two games I ever owned for the Sega Dreamcast was Soul Calibur 1 and Hydro Thunder, which were both launch titles and great launch titles at that. I mean, I have probably soaked into Hydro Thunder probably at least a good, I don't know, probably throughout all the years, off and on, occasionally I will play this. Put in like 2 to 3 hour session every several months or so, or once a year, something like that. I will plug in and play for a couple hours. Just replaying like all the tracks and everything in Hydro Thunder. I just love this game in general. It is my number one favorite racing game of all time. And I'm not a big sports person. Anybody that's followed my channel for a little while knows I'm not big on sports games. Regular racing games, the only thing I like is pretty much probably, is probably Forza Horizon. That's about it. But Hydro Thunder is arguably my favorite racing game of all time. I love this game to death. I have invested well over probably 1,000 hours into this game overall. It's a fun, great arcade racer, and in general it's just a really good time, and it's really fun playing even in split screen with a friend. You all, like an old friend of mine, which sadly is out of state right now, we would play sometimes multiple hours just racing each other for fun. And it's a blast, honestly. It's great to play with friends. That's the great thing about Hydro Thunder. But also, I really enjoy the music in the game, and I will always have a special place for Hydro Thunder for me personally. Next title to talk about is probably one of the most unique. This would be a game I would probably end up getting about 6 to 7 months after getting my Dreamcast. I would pick this game up. Sadly, I bought it from Electronics Boutique, game disc only, but because of that, I got it for a lot cheaper. I remember when I picked this up, I probably paid, give or take, about $22, give or take, somewhere around that, from Electronics Boutique for it. Now, though, the disc by itself is going for well over like $50, $60 now. In case complete, you're probably looking at over $100. But yeah, that is the original Jet Grind Radio, which did get an HD re-release of the game on mobile, which it's garbage in my opinion. The emulation stuff is not good for the mobile. If you at all are curious about playing the HD re-release of Jet Grind Radio, also known as Jet Set Radio, I recommend getting the version if you have a PlayStation Vita, though. The PS Vita, in my opinion, got the best version or port of the HD remastered. In my opinion, is easily the best version. That'll run you only probably like $9.99 if I remember. Way cheaper than going for the original game. If, like me, you want more authentic, play it on actual Dreamcast. Good way to go about it. And this game is genuinely a lot of fun. I will always have a special place. And the fact Jet Grand Rayo was the very first cel-shaded game I ever owned. It was the very first cel-shaded art style 3D game I ever played and owned. And this is what would lead me to become obsessed with cel-shaded games. Well, this and then a few years later, a little game called Wind Waker. But yeah, this is what began my love and obsession for cel-shaded games. So thank you, Jet Grind Radio, for that. Definitely a superb, amazing game that deserves as much love as it gets, because I hold this game very highly. Now, looking on other genres of gaming, like I mentioned already a bit, on fighting game side, if you want great 2D fighting games, I do recommend Dead or Alive 2, but this is number one, arguably, in my opinion. Soul Calibur 1, which, of course, like I said, it was one of the first two games I ever played on the Dreamcast, was this and Hydro Thunder. And I can't even tell you how many times over the years I have actually played this game. It's kind of ridiculous how much and how addictive this game, even to this day, the gameplay is still solid and plays better than a lot of fighting games nowadays, which is kind of crazy. Um, I mean, graphically, it looks incredible for a 22-year-old game. Boy, does that make me feel old, knowing this game is 22 years old. But nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact it is an amazing game. Cool little artwork on the Japanese version disc with Nightmare right there. But seriously, if you ever get a chance, try out Soul Calibur 1. It is just a lot of fun and definitely looks amazing for its age. And gameplay-wise, it still runs at 60 frames per second. That's pretty impressive. Just like Tekken 3 ran at 60 frames per second on the PS1. That's impressive when there are games today that have a hard time running at 60 frames, and games from this time period, 20 plus years old, run better than some games now, which is kind of ridiculous to think about. But doesn't change the fact, incredible game, amazing soundtrack, great characters, and would be the beginning of my obsession for Edgelord Nightmare. Next, talking a bit quickly, briefly, about another game that I personally really like and have always loved, that being Vigilante 8: The Second Offense. This game will always hold a special place for me. In my opinion, it is my number one favorite vehicular combat game of all time. Most people would choose Twisted Metal, yes. Twisted Metal is amazing. Twisted Metal 2 is, in my opinion, the best of the series. At least personal favorite. Gameplay-wise, probably Twisted Metal Black is the best. But for me, Vigilante: The Second Offense is an amazing game with some ridiculous over-the-top stuff. Like the one battle arena place you can play in the middle of the desert. There's a giant asteroid that will fall and destroy everything around a big crater. You go and blast open the asteroid. A giant, like 20-30 foot laser blasting ant will come out of and start blasting at you and kill everything. Luckily, you can kill the ant, but good luck surviving. But also the fact you can grab stuff to make your car and stuff also fly in the air and stuff like that. Those abilities, and also get stuff to go in the water and fly around in the water and stuff like a boat. It's just really cool. Stuff that they never did in games like Twisted Metal that gave Vigilante its own very unique identity. I just wish Activision would bring this franchise back to life with only 2 installments. The original PS1 version, which I love, and then this. To me, this is how you do a sequel. And yeah, to me, still the best vehicular combat game of all time. Also, quickly mention, easily my second favorite Resident Evil game of all time. Resident Evil Code Veronica. This game will definitely hold a special place for me. It was my very first horror game that I would play on the Dreamcast. A few years after, I would pick up the Dreamcast version of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, which, may I add, is easily the best version of the game. It's the Dreamcast, far superior. But, yeah, and the fact you can still get this game pretty dang cheap, believe it or not. You can still easily find this for a very affordable price. And that goes to show why I say this is a very underrated game, because it's not very high in demand, which makes it perfect for collecting. If you don't have a Dreamcast, pick up the Veronica X port, which is on GameCube and PS2. I recommend picking it up if you don't have Dreamcast. But otherwise, get this, try it. Heck, if you get a chance, try out the horror game called Blue Stinger. It's another great game. Second to last, another great game. This would be the game that would introduce me to my second favorite punk band of all time. That being The Offspring, because the entire soundtrack to Crazy Taxi would be done by The Offspring. It is an amazing, fun arcade game that, frankly, amazes me how good this game still is, and it still plays incredible. And the music is still amazing. Speaking as a long-time, though, Offspring fan, and mainly thanks to this is what made me an Offspring fan. So I definitely owe this game a lot for getting me into that band. Last but not least, quickly mention, most important, the Marvel vs. Capcom games on the Dreamcast. First, we have Marvel vs. Capcom 1, which was an incredible sequel, and within my opinion, one of the greatest bosses in fighting game history. Good difficulty, good challenge, and quite intimidating and badass looking boss, that being Onslaught. As well as some really cool secret characters, which you have to know a certain pattern to import in the main character select screen, and you can unlock multiple other characters like Orange Hulk, Gold War Machine. You could also unlock Roll, Mega Man's sister, Red Venom, Lilith, also with her own moveset. So not just a swap out with Morrigan, but her actual Darkstalker moveset, which is really cool. And it's just awesome, like all those different like hidden characters you can unlock. Orange Hulk, interesting. My personal favorite of, oh yeah, there was also Shadow Lady, Evil Chun. Shadow Lady is probably my favorite of all of the hidden characters. Still an incredible game that plays great to this day. Love my original duo of Ryu and Mega Man. Though Strider is really a lot of fun in the game, along with also Captain Commando. Then we have, well, a game, what else can I say other than it's Marvel vs. Capcom 2, or it's Marvel, baby. Amazing, awesome jazzy blues type music in the background, and I love it for all the amazingness of it. But with that said, I'll get ready to cut this video. Hopefully you enjoyed part 1 of my retrospective for the Sega Dreamcast, part 1 of my 6th console generation retrospective. Leave a comment, tell me what games do you hold a special place for. But with that said, I'll see you all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Stay safe out there in this crazy world we live in currently. And stay tuned next time for the PS2 retrospective. See you then.